So the purposes of this video is to basically update my game drive, which is currently a 1TB hybrid drive, and it is basically full. So that drive is going to be upgraded with this. This is a Samsung QVO 860 or 860 QVO, and this is a 2TB SSD, which right now is on for a hell of a good deal. So I copped this basically immediately, and I'm gonna basically stick this bad boy in. But first I do need to back up on my data and get started. It's not porn, honest. Yeah, this part's gonna take a while. I'll probably do this off camera. I should also mention that previously I had my Origin library and my Steam library separated onto two separate disks. For some reason, I can't remember why I did that. But the advantage of this new drive is that I will be able to consolidate all of my games onto one drive, so everything is nice and organized and OCD friendly. So moving on to the results of the testing that I did. I tested 6 games. And I loaded each game 5 times on the old setup and the new setup, and then compared the loading time difference, just to see what sort of impact it would make. So first up is Apex Legends, the big game at the moment, and at least from these results we can actually see that there is very little difference between using a mechanical drive or a SSD. The fourth result is a bit of an outlier, so we can kind of discard that. But yeah, there's generally around a 1 or 1.5 second gap between using a mechanical drive and an SSD, so not as big as I thought it was going to be. Next up, there is Battlefield 1, and very similar story. The first run actually took longer on the SSD compared to the hybrid drive. I'm not really sure why, but subsequent results are practically identical. So again, not as big as a gap as I expected. Next up is CSGO, and this is where the results are a little bit more pronounced. So at least on the first run, both setups actually took quite a long time to load up. On the hybrid drive, the first run was 47.5 seconds, and on the SSD was 34.3 seconds. However, once the first run was over and the data was cached, both setups performed virtually identically from there onwards. So that is quite interesting, to be honest. Then next up is PUBG. Now PUBG is relatively similar to what CSGO looked like, whereas the first run took quite a long time, and then once the data was cached, and then everything performed fairly equally. And then PUBG was a bit of a strange one, because all the results except the first run actually took longer on the SSD than it did on the hybrid drive. Not really sure why there. Next up is Overwatch, and Overwatch surprised me quite a lot. Basically mainly because of how quickly it loaded in. The longest time was that the very first run on the old setup, which was 20 seconds. And then from there onwards, the times were around 17 to 18 seconds to actually load into the game, which is very, very fast. And I was quite surprised by that, actually. And at least from the looks of things, apart from the second run, at least Overwatch does prefer to have an SSD compared to a hybrid drive. The difference in time is very small, or generally around half a second to 1 second. And then lastly, there is Fortnite. Now Fortnite, at least from an initial look at things, does prefer SSD storage compared to hybrid drive or standard mechanical drive storage. The difference in times though is only very slight, only around 2 seconds less on the new setup compared to the old setup. So finally, if we average out all of the results on the old setup compared to the new setup, we get a time of 39.43 seconds on the old setup. That is an average time, and then an average boot time or average load time on the new setup of 38.6 seconds.
So with everything averaged out, there is only really a gain of, what, 0.8 seconds. That's the gain compared to a mechanical drive to an SSD, which honestly surprised me quite a lot. I thought there would be a much larger difference between that, but I guess mechanical storage can still keep up with a lot of current games. But I can probably tell in the future the differences may be more pronounced as the world gradually becomes more SSD, well, reliant or dependent. But yeah, now this was a little fun experiment, and I'm definitely going to make use of the extra storage as well. And thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.